C'est une route qui va quelque part nous emmènera. Questa strada che va da qualche parte ci porterà. I giardini che saranno Omawada, Inatenames. Questa strada che va da qualche parte ci porterà. I giardini che saranno Omawada, Inatenames.
So thank you very much, and sorry for the delay, but it was due to some technical reasons. But eventually we succeeded in solving. I have the honor and the pleasure to introduce this event dedicated by the Centro Piemontese di Studi Africani to the Ethiopian perspective on the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. It is actually the second event dedicated by the Center to this issue during the present month, the first having been on the 2nd of March, a webinar organized by the Egyptian Embassy in Rome, whose recording is still available on our website. In recent years, the Center has repeatedly focused its attention on issues related to so-called water diplomacy, regarding the shared management of water resources affecting several countries and have an impact on different African environments. 2.5 years ago, an international meeting dedicated to the River Nile issues had been hosted in Torino, involving the participation of international experts and the concerned countries alike. Last November, we dedicated a 5-day encounter to the Lake Chad Basin, focusing on the challenges posed by its sustainable management under different perspectives, from the scientific one concerning climate change and its environmental impact to the economic and social ones. The River Nile water management poses no less difficult international challenges, as I personally know very well, having been Italian ambassador in Addis Ababa from 2010 to 2014. Water sharing agreements were stricken in a distant past, in 1929, whose parties were still Egypt and the UK, representing also some of the upstream countries still under colonial rule, and in 1959 between Egypt and Sudan, but leaving out Ethiopia. The economic development of Ethiopia radically changed the situation. The Gerd Dam is aimed at producing 6,000 megawatts of electricity, doubling Ethiopia's present output and representing potentially a big boost on the economic development of the entire region. Its possible impact on downstream countries has been the subject of intense debate. Unfortunately, lengthy negotiations between the three main states concerned, Ethiopia, Egypt, and Sudan, have not yet produced a satisfactory result for all parties. Neither a broader framework convention negotiated under the Nile Basin Initiative has been ratified by all member states of the initiative. Mediation efforts conducted by the US and the African Union have equally failed to produce a positive outcome until now. In today's event, eminent Ethiopian negotiators and experts will present the Ethiopian point of view on the issue. Our intention, as in the parallel event conducted with Egypt, is to offer a platform available to all parties for a free illustration of their points of view to the public opinion and the experts. We hope that also Sudan may join the other two countries that have already offered to illustrate their position. I will leave the floor to Ambassador Fiseha Tawel, Director General for neighboring countries, including Egypt and IGAD, who will give his introductory remarks. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Renzo Rosso. And I'm very happy to follow to speak following your introduction, which I am very much satisfied with it. And I thank also the center for organizing it. So now our position is that this Renaissance Dam, the Great Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, what we call it the GERD, is built over the river Abai. We call it Abai in Ethiopia, mostly referred by foreigners as the Blue Nile. And it is the main tributary to the Nile originating from Ethiopia that contributes 86% of the total Blue Nile or Abai River water. From Ethiopia, this water sends through our border 77 billion cubic meters of water a year and reaches Egypt and Sudan, ending up in Mediterranean Sea. The river makes up 2/3 of Ethiopia's total surface water, incorporating many tributaries. Furthermore, the river basin is inhabited by nearly 50 million people. 50 million people, Ethiopians, live around that basin. While having this resource, and in absolute paradox, 65 million of Ethiopians have no electricity access and no clean drinking water. We also have an underdeveloped and rain-dependent agriculture, which is the reason behind Ethiopia's food shortages and malnutrition of millions of children in Ethiopia. In addition, Ethiopian women and girls lead an awfully deprived life without education, basic health service, and clean energy. I do not have to tell you anything about Ethiopian youth that migrate to all places, including Italy, to seek economic opportunities that are absent in their homes due to our inability to turn our natural resources into livelihoods. This is the backdrop for the construction of the Ethiopian Grand Renaissance Dam. The GERD is our poverty reduction project. The dam, being entirely financed by Ethiopians, welds the hopes and aspirations of Ethiopian children for a better tomorrow. The GERD carries the longing for Ethiopian women and men to live a better future of their children. The GERD and the Renaissance Dam represents dignity that stems from sustainable livelihood and self-reliance. Ladies and gentlemen, Egypt, Ethiopia, and Sudan started this negotiation on the GERD and its operation in 2017. And the negotiation is now only 5 years, unlike to what Egypt and Sudan want us to believe that it is 10 years old. It is only 5 years old. The negotiation is being held within the framework of the Declaration of Principles that is signed by the 3 countries in March 2015. All engagements are based, and our legal framework is 2015. It is very important to note that the Grand Renaissance Dam is the first project on the Nile discussed by the riparian countries. And you should bear in mind, there are more than 30 projects, 30, on the Nile. From this, the largest reservoir is the High Aswan Dam, which I myself visited and worked in Cairo for 6 years. And that dam is the biggest in the world. And it is water capacity is just second to none. And again, the GERD is the largest in Africa in terms of the volume of energy it will generate, as clearly Ronenzo said it, 6,000 megawatts. And when the Aswan Dam was built, Ethiopia pleaded for Egypt to open up for discussion and to assess the impact of the dam over Ethiopia's rights in its future use. And this is in 1959. Egypt did not even reply to our letter. When Egypt further developed the Toshka at its border with Libya, and when Egypt did take the river through the Suez Canal using Al Salam Canal, which is at the border with Israel and Palestine, and that pipe has transferred the Nile basin, the Nile water out of its basin, and apparently Ethiopia filed its objection, and that fell on the unheeding ears of Egypt. So we were rejected twice. Sudan also built its hydroelectric and irrigation dams, many of them without any consultation whatsoever with Ethiopia. While the practice on the Nile basin was the above, that non-consultation with the source, Ethiopia rather preferred to distance itself from this lawless trend by Egypt and the Sudan. Therefore, in 2011, when the construction project was commenced, Ethiopia gave Egypt and Sudan information about the project. We notified them. We also created an international panel of experts in which they were represented. In that international panel of experts, Sudan and Egypt were with us all along. We availed more than 150 documents that were scrutinized by the panel. And in 2013, Egypt and Sudan signed off the report of the panel of experts attesting its safety as well as its multidimensional benefit to Egypt and the Sudan. They have affirmed this long time ago. And this time around, they are just changing their position because of circumstances, which I will say it later on. This is, ladies and gentlemen, an unprecedented cooperation and good neighborliness showed by Ethiopia, in spite of the egregious acts of injustice committed by both Egypt and the Sudan. The Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam is a development project, basically, and it is neither political nor a matter of security unless Egypt and Sudan decide to make it so, as the president of Egypt talked very provocative statements yesterday at the Suez Canal. Ethiopia is clear-eyed about its rights and obligations. We are not oblivious of our rights and obligations. We never claim the entire flow of the Nile as ours only, whereas Egypt claims the entire flow of the Nile as its own, and they go to the extent of citing their water scarcity to argue against Ethiopia's use. Egypt even enshrines in its constitution that the so-called historic right, denying the very existence of the other people of the Nile. And this principle, advocated by Egypt through historical rights, must be scrutinized because it emanates from its colonial mentality and the colonial treaty. This is established by the 1929 and then the 1959 colonial and British-sponsored agreements. This historical right is based on 1929 and 1959 agreements, which excluded Ethiopia entirely. And for your surprise, these treaties apportion the Nile water among Egypt, the Sudan, and to the evaporation in the desert. Ethiopia is not a member state to this treaty, the 1959. And Ethiopia has persistently rejected this treaty from the beginning. Now, Ethiopia is being asked by Egypt to respect the reality created in Egypt based on this treaty. The simple analogy for this is Switzerland and France concluding a treaty for the full control of the Po River and later accusing Italy, your own country, of attempting to use this river. This is exactly what Egypt and Sudan are asking Ethiopia. Egypt and the Sudan committed a grave mistake in concluding a treaty over a water that originates from Ethiopia and excluding Ethiopia. They are now making even more grave mistake by defending their independence over a resource they don't have a full control over and aggravating their relations with Ethiopia. The fact is, the Nile belongs to 11 riparian countries. All of these countries have a right to use the resource in an equitable and reasonable manner. Egypt and Sudan, as first users of the resource, will best serve their national interest through participating in constructive dialogue and creating a viable regional mechanism. The Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam creates an opportunity for Egypt and Sudan to correct their strategic mistakes. It is an opportunity for them to adjust to the mistake they have done. And we expect the two countries to stop all the hyperbole and engage in the trilateral negotiations with an authentic intention of reaching an agreement. If it was for the outrageous, illegal, and at instances inhuman approach of Egypt and the Sudan, Ethiopia would not have given them a chance to discuss the Grand Renaissance Dam. Nevertheless, the chance is created, and it is for them to make the best use of it. With this, brothers and sisters, I will give the opportunity to my members of delegation of the Ethiopian negotiating team with us. And first and foremost, none other than Dr. Ilma Sleshi, who will brief us on the technical issues in the negotiation, Ethiopia's perspective therein, and also Ms. Lamlam Fisaha, who will brief us on the most prominent legal issues and Ethiopia's perspectives. I thank you very much, and I give the floor to Lamlam, if you allow me, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Fisaha. Thank you very much, Professor Zoe, former Ambassador of Italy to Ethiopia, for creating this opportunity. Good afternoon, everyone, distinguished participants and followers of this webinar. I hope everyone is safe and healthy. Before my presentation, I would like to take a moment to thank the Italian Center for African Studies for organizing this session dedicated for the presentation of Ethiopia's perspective over the Renaissance Dam. And Ethiopia is building over the Abai River, called the Blue Nile in Sudan's territory. We recognize the importance of the topic at hand in the context of regional and global politics. We especially recognize the unique context on which we are presenting this matter at this center and an Italian audience, considering Italy is a country of more than 500 dams, many of which built over transboundary rivers. Also considering the involvement of Italy in the development of several infrastructures on shared water resources, including, for that matter, the GERD, which is under construction by a lead contractor, Salini. It gives us comfort that our subject is not alien, and our explanations will fall on understanding ears and open minds. Saying this, I will focus my presentation on the most prominent legal issues, by giving special emphasis for issues and questions that we assume you would like us to respond to. On this basis, my brief presentation will have the following outline. First, on the matter of the Nile, I will elucidate the behavior of the two most important countries, Egypt and Ethiopia. What have we done for cooperation? What have we done in the negotiations to be able to bridge our differences and reach an agreement? Secondly, I will take you through the issues we are negotiating on and also outline the points of difference. Third, I will share with you Ethiopia's perspective on the much talked about binding agreement. And fourth, I will draw your attention to issues of dam safety. Those are issues mostly raised by Sudan and somehow echoed by Egypt as well. Following that, I will present the main impediment for reaching an agreement. This will respond to your curiosity on why these ancient and big countries in Africa cannot reach an agreement over a single hydroelectric dam. Finally, I will share with you some points on the viable ways of forward that Ethiopia believes should be pursued by the three countries. If you allow me, I will share a screen for my presentation so that you will be able to follow it clearly. I'm sorry, let me go to the screen sharing. Something is happening. I will share it in the process. In order to save time, let me start my presentation, and I will continue my efforts to manage sharing the screen in the process. So the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, as Ambassador Fisah Shaul has stated, is being built on the Blue Nile River, the river that consists of 2/3 of Ethiopia's surface water resource. As you very well know, Ethiopia is a country with a very limited groundwater resource, as well as a landlocked state with no access to seawater. So desalination, as well as the utilization of a groundwater resource, is not a viable option for Ethiopia that has 112 million population. Let me set the background. Let me set the stage for us to understand what Ethiopia and Egypt has been doing so far in order to foster cooperation on the Nile Basin. Let me start by stating Egypt's behavior. Ethiopia in 1956, 1957, 1980, and 1997, during the commencement of the construction of the High Aswan Dam, during the conclusion of the 1959 Water Allocation Treaty, during the construction of the Al Salam and the Tushka canals, requested Egypt for consultation. That consultation was very much important because Egypt, as it is doing today, was known to cite its existing use of water to foreclose or prohibit Ethiopia from developing its water resource. However, Egypt did not respond to the pleas for cooperation and consultation, and it pursued its monopolistic and hydrohegemony approach over the Nile. In 1959, Egypt and Sudan concluded a treaty for the full control of the flow of the Nile. These two countries took 2/3 of Ethiopia's water resource, divided it among themselves, established a water usage scheme in their territories, and today they are asking us to comply with their rights, which is created by a monopolistic approach created since the conclusion of the treaty in 1959 and as far back as 1929. In 2013 and 2019, Egypt obstructed the assessment study over the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. Ethiopia was willing to assess the socio-economic impact of the GERD over Egypt and Sudan. However, Egypt and Sudan insisted on using the existing use as a baseline for the study, and they obstructed the scientific approach the country should have followed at that time. To date, Egypt boycotted the Cooperative Framework Agreement, which is signed by 6 Nile Basin countries and ratified by 4 countries. Egypt is not a member state to this treaty, despite negotiating the treaty for 13 years' time, and despite the fact that the treaty contains most of the claims and demands of Egypt. In 2020, Egypt accused Ethiopia before the UN Security Council for building a hydroelectric dam. The country that generates 86% of the water flow of the Nile is accused before the UNSC for building a hydroelectric dam that doesn't consume water, that rather generates electricity for Ethiopians and releases, in fact, in a greater amount, water to Egypt and Sudan. Throughout our history and throughout the process of the GERD construction, Egypt demonstrated diplomatic and military hostility against Ethiopia. I can go as far back as yesterday afternoon, where the Egyptian president has stated that any country that touches a drop of water from the Nile will face the worst of Egypt's military capability, which threatens no one really and falls on the deaf ears of Ethiopians, obviously. However, the level of hostility and diplomatic aggressive methods that are followed are expressed as far back as yesterday's afternoon. Ethiopia's behavior. What did Ethiopia do so far? The GERD is the only project on the Nile that is discussed by the riparian countries. As Ambassador Fisah has stated, there are about 32 projects. The High Aswan Dam is one of the largest reservoirs in the world. In fact, the High Aswan Dam is 2.5 times larger than the GERD in terms of reservoir capacity. However, the High Aswan Dam is not discussed by any of the countries, and today it's being cited to foreclose Ethiopia's development. Out of 32 small and large projects, as I have said, the GERD is the only project that is discussed. In 2011, Ethiopia invited Egypt and Sudan to discuss the GERD. In 2012, Ethiopia initiated and established the International Panel of Experts and provided 153 study and design documents for this panel. The panel consists of representatives from Ethiopia, Sudan, and Egypt, France, South Africa, and Germany that sat down and scrutinized the study and design documents of the GERD. Ethiopia in 2015 signed the Declaration of Principles. There is no legal instrument over the Nile or over any of the projects that outlines the cooperation framework as well as the rights and obligations of the countries. Still, Ethiopia was willing enough to conclude the Declaration of Principles in 2015 to provide for the framework for the negotiation and as well as cooperation between the countries with regard to the GARD. We established a national scientific group in 2019. We signed a comprehensive framework agreement on the Nile in 2010. We offered conclusion of a water allocation agreement in the ongoing negotiation. All this cooperation is not due to the willingness of Egypt and Sudan to cooperate over the Nile. Rather, it's in spite of their unwillingness to cooperate as well as their obstructive methods followed all along our negotiation as well as our relationship. Let me say very few words on the Declaration of Principles. This document is an outcome of a negotiation between the three countries that was done between 2011 and 2015. The process, the IPOE process and the TNC process, the National Committee process culminated in the conclusion of this Declaration of Principles in 2015. It provides for the principles of equitable and reasonable utilization. It also provides that the countries should conduct a transboundary impact assessment study on the socio-economic impact of the dam over Egypt and Sudan. And it instructs the countries to use the outcome of the study to agree on the rules and guidelines for the first filling and annual operation of the dam. The Declaration of Principles also states the filling of the dam shall take place in parallel with the construction. It also states the operation rules will be adjusted by the dam owner from time to time. And the Declaration of Principles provides for data exchange for the study and to manage emergency that may arise during the operation of the dam. The coordination mechanism between the water ministries of the three countries is also enshrined under the Declaration of Principles. Ethiopia has time and again assured Egypt and Sudan and the international community that Ethiopia is willing and ready to live up to the provisions of the Declaration of Principles. However, we are facing serious challenge because of the stance of Egypt and Sudan to shy away from the provisions as well to the extent of advancing some form of exit from this instrument. What are the issues? What are the three countries discussing in this 5-year-old negotiation on the GARD? First of all, we are negotiating on the guidelines and rules for the first filling and annual operation of the dam. We are not negotiating water allocation or water utilization treaty of the Nile. That is very important and it should be clear. Then why are we not agreeing on a single hydroelectric dam that we know will not consume water? The first issue of contention between the three countries is the future water use upstream of the GARD. You learned from Dr. Yilmaz's presentation that the GARD instrument is going to provide for several thresholds, quantified obligations that contain the responsibility of Ethiopia to release a certain volume of water to Egypt and Sudan during the filling as well as the annual operation of the dam. Ethiopia argues those numbers, those quantified obligations that provides only for the obligation of Ethiopia to release the water should not amount to a water allocation agreement, and it should not foreclose Ethiopia's right to use the water in the future upstream of the GARD. In this very important point of contention, Egypt and Sudan argue that Ethiopia in the future can develop the Blue Nile River only if it respects its obligation under the GARD agreement. That means if Ethiopia is going to have a project that will reduce the volume of water that will exceed the GARD and reach the territory of Sudan, then Ethiopia has to seek the consent of Egypt and Sudan to develop that resource. This practically makes the GARD the last project Ethiopia will make, will construct over the Blue Nile. And it's not in a position to agree on something that will foreclose its future use, especially so in a situation where the water is completely used in Egypt and Sudan, and Ethiopia has no agreement with the two countries to determine the water allocation and the water share of the countries. On the scope and objective of the instrument, we have an agreement on a general language. However, Egypt and Sudan argue that the quantified obligations, the release obligation that we agree on the GERD instrument should make up a threshold for equitable and reasonable share and a threshold of significant harm. As you very well know, and the people that have a basic information on the matter of transboundary rivers would understand, the threshold for equitable and reasonable right, as well as the threshold for significant harm, has to be established by a water allocation agreement, a comprehensive treaty that regulates the rights and obligations of the countries to utilize the river. In this instance, Egypt and Sudan are agreeing Ethiopia's obligation with regard to equitable and reasonable utilization and threshold of significant harm has to be determined by the GERD instrument. We are arguing no, the GERD instrument shall only provide for the first filling and annual operation rules, and then the three countries has to sit down and determine the significant harm and what is reasonable share and equitable share by a different instrument. Link with the status quo of water use and water allocation treaty between Egypt and Sudan. As I have said, Egypt and Sudan have a treaty, the 1959 treaty that allocated the water of the Nile between Egypt, Sudan, and the Sahara Desert for evaporation. Egypt and Sudan are saying the status quo has to be protected, the status quo has to be respected, and the GERD instrument cannot contain a disclaimer clause that says the GERD instrument doesn't imply recognition by Ethiopia of the 1959 treaty or existing water use established by the treaty in Egypt and Sudan. Ethiopia is very clear on this topic. It has a very clear position. Our legitimate claim is the GERD instrument and the agreement we are going to reach on the GERD will not mean or cannot be interpreted as our recognition of the existing water use and the 1959 treaty concluded between Egypt and Sudan. When it comes to data exchange obligations, it should be one of the most simplest parts or segments of our negotiation. It should have been that way. However, on the data exchange obligation, Ethiopia is willing to provide Egypt and Sudan on a reciprocal basis data on inflow of the GERD, the dam level at the GERD, and the outflow from the GERD. We are committed for an absolute transparency on how the GERD will be operated. However, Egypt refused to provide data, especially on the outflow from the GERD. We know why they seek to restrict access to data with this regard. As we know, the Toshka Canal and the Al Salam Canal are projects that take the Nile water out of the basin as far as the Sinai Desert and even to places further from that area. Egypt doesn't want to disclose data on its water use on these places, and they refuse to reciprocate data exchange. On the mandate of the coordination mechanism, one of the continuous coordination mechanism methods we are going to create in the GERD instrument is a technical committee and a ministerial committee. The two committees will deal with the data exchange mechanism. They will resolve issues we will face in the course of operation of the GERD, and they will also address the grievances and also concerns that Egypt and Sudan may have with regard to the methods of operation we are going to follow. Ethiopia is willing to establish this technical committee and ministerial committee. Bear in mind, there is no basin-wide coordination mechanism on the Nile. The Nile Basin Commission is yet to be established. The Cooperative Framework Agreement is still waiting for the ratification of 2 more countries for its entry into force. In the absence of such a regional mechanism, Ethiopia went to the extent of expressing its willingness to establish a technical committee and a ministerial committee. However, Egypt demands a mechanism that will have a role of monitoring Ethiopia in implementing the GERD rules and guidelines. The Ethiopian people, from their very meager resource, are building a dam to administer it, to manage it themselves for their best use and also their best interest. Egypt is now asking the coordination mechanism they will sit in should have a role of monitoring Ethiopia administer its own infrastructure. It's one of the deepest expressions of distrust, as well as it undermines the sovereignty of Ethiopia to administer the resource. On dispute resolution, we have a partial agreement. We have an agreement to resolve our differences through negotiation in the coordination mechanism. However, Egypt and Sudan demand that they should have a right to take Ethiopia to a court of law for every claim they may raise in the operation of the dam. There is one problem on this. Ethiopia doesn't know its share over the Nile. Egypt and Sudan already established an illegitimate water use in their territories. They are going to accuse, or they are going to see the GERD in the light of their existing water use, which Ethiopia doesn't accept. So the best solution and the workable mechanism for us is to sit down in a negotiating room to coordinate in the coordination mechanism to resolve our differences. I would like to draw your attention to the water allocation agreement between Egypt and Sudan, which doesn't have any dispute resolution mechanism at all. And there is no reason, justification, or even a fair and level playing field for Egypt and Ethiopia to have an adjudicatory and adversarial mechanism for resolving issues that may be encountered during the implementation of the GERD instrument. The other issue is whether or not the GERD instrument is going to be a binding agreement. In the presentations made before, and also in all the media advocacies that are being done, Egypt and Sudan argue that Ethiopia is not willing to conclude a binding agreement over the GERD. That's not true. Ethiopia offers two binding agreements for Egypt and Sudan. The first binding agreement is on guidelines and rules on first filling and annual operation of the GERD, binding to the extent provided under the Declaration of Principles, with adjustment right to the dam owner as provided under the Declaration of Principles, and with clear insulation from future use. Ethiopia's future use will not be subjected to the consent of Egypt and Sudan, and the Ethiopia's right for the optimal operation of the GERD has to be ensured following the agreement that is provided within the Declaration of Principles. So the first agreement, a binding agreement we are offering Egypt and Sudan, is an agreement, a guideline and rule on first filling and annual operation of the GERD. On the second one, we are offering Egypt and Sudan a binding agreement on water allocation to resolve all the outstanding issues over the share of the countries over the Nile. So the accusation and all the information that Ethiopia is refusing to conclude a binding agreement over the GERD is not accurate. In fact, Ethiopia is offering two sets of binding agreements on the GERD by insulating it from the future water use, and on the Nile water allocation agreement that shall be concluded by the three countries. Dam safety. This is the other very important issue indeed that is raised by Egypt and Sudan, and especially Sudan. In 2013, the International Panel of Experts, the report, which is signed by Egypt and Sudan, it concludes that the present design criteria refers to a number of international standards and guidelines, which is appreciated. I am quoting the report itself. It also states, according to the sliding analysis, all factors of safety against the sliding along the horizontal lift joints and at the dam rock contact are above the required factors of safety. The report also says the dam size is consistent with the inflow at the GERD site. The report also says the design and construction of the GERD is up to international standards. The report goes on to say the contractor and the consultant are companies renowned for accumulated experience in the field of dam construction. This is a report which is signed, co-prepared by Egypt and Sudan, and that they have signed in 2013. In 2015, when we conclude the Declaration of Principles, Principle 8 provides the three countries appreciated the efforts undertaken thus far by Ethiopia in implementing the IPA recommendations pertinent to the GERD safety. This is 2015. And in 2020, June 8, 2020, the current water minister of Sudan said GERD is safer than the dams in Egypt and Sudan. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, that dam safety is very important it's no one would argue about it, and Ethiopia should not build or invest $4.5 billion, a very scarce resource, over a dam at its border with Sudan to later lose it for safety issues. We are building a very safe and standard dam that made the international standards and is being built by an internationally renowned construction companies and consultants, and there are no problems whatsoever when it comes to dam safety. And I cannot cite a better testimony other than the water minister of Sudan himself, who stated on June 8, 2020, that GERD is safer than the dams in Sudan and in Egypt. The impediment for cooperation. So if things are this clear, if the problem is very much known, why are the three countries not agreeing on the GERD instrument? The major problem, the nemesis in this room, is the claims that are filed by Egypt and Sudan, the protection of historic rights. They argue the existing water use in Egypt and Sudan has to be respected by the upper riparian countries. Bear in mind, if I promise to respect Egypt and Sudan's historic right, then I am promising that I will not be utilizing the Nile water. How can the government of Ethiopia promise not to use the Nile water that consists 2/3 of the country's surface water resource? How can we say we are not going to build irrigation over the Blue Nile while almost our entire water resource is in this basin? How can we say the GERD is going to be the last project we will build while our population is going to reach 250 in 30 years' time? This is the major problem. The existing water use in Egypt is called a historic right, and it's established by the 1959 treaty, which Ethiopia rejects. Arguments on impending scarcity of water in Egypt are founded on the assertion that the current flow is the legitimate right of Egypt. Yesterday, the president of Egypt had said, no country can touch a drop of water of the Nile. If we cannot touch the drop of water of the Nile, then what is the room for negotiation? What are we discussing? What is the compromise Egypt is going to make? They are saying that the full control of the Nile cannot be compromised by anyone. That is the predicament we are in. That is the problems we are facing in this GERD negotiation. The Egyptian argument is, even with the monopoly of the Nile water, Egypt has water scarcity. Hence, no Nile riparian country can build a project that will reduce the flow of the Nile that reaches Egypt. Ethiopia cannot be okay with this. Rwanda cannot be okay with this. Uganda, Kenya, and all the other riparian countries that will today or tomorrow will utilize the Nile water cannot be okay with this. Egypt leaves no room for negotiation, and Ethiopia continues to demand the creation of this room by establishing equitable and reasonable utilization regime over the Nile. The viable solution for our problem is an inclusive Nile water treaty, an inclusive regional mechanism over the Nile. Immediately, we can agree on the GERD filling. The GERD filling, as Dr. Ilma is going to elucidate, will take up to 7 years. In that 7 years' time, we can sit down and negotiate on a comprehensive water treaty, a water allocation agreement between Egypt, Ethiopia, and Sudan, and also involving all the other Nile riparian countries. The Cooperative Framework Agreement, the CFA, provides the basis, the framework, the platform for our three countries to negotiate on a water allocation treaty. It's negotiated for 13 years. It catered for the interests of Egypt and Sudan. It's ratified by 4 countries, Ethiopia, Tanzania, Rwanda, and Uganda. We are waiting for 2 ratifications. Hopefully, Egypt and Sudan will ratify it and give us, a break and also a platform to bring a solution on our critical problem. The solution, as I have stated, is concluding the GERD negotiation by signing a filling agreement and then resorting to a cooperative and comprehensive water allocation treaty over the Nile. Finally, I would like to conclude by singling out some very important points. The first is there is no legal obligation to conclude the GERD agreement or seek Egypt and Sudan's agreement to fill and operate the dam, as well as to build other projects in Ethiopia. The GERD is the first experience where we are trying to break away from the age of incorporation, hegemony, and also obstruction of development in each other's territories. It's a practice we entered into with good faith and wanting to reach an agreement. However, there is no obligation emanating from law or practice for Ethiopia to wait for Egypt and Sudan's blessings to implement its projects. The second one, negotiated agreement is the only solution. Traits, characterization of the project as a security problem, using international mechanisms by mischaracterizing the project in the negotiation process, political pressure, financial pressure, all those are not going to yield anything. We can reach an agreement that ensures the predictability Egypt and Sudan needs, that accrues the benefits of the GERD for both countries, and that rectifies the unjust status quo. This depends on the willingness of Egypt and Sudan to come on board and understand the age we are in, the time we are living under, with a refreshed mindset that really recognizes that there are now countries on the Nile Basin, independent countries, that are in a position to utilize their resource and claim their share. The missing factor so far is the inability and unwillingness of Egypt to let go of its colonial privilege and to recognize the rights and needs of neighboring peoples. Thank you very much for your attention. I will respond to the questions that may be raised on the legal aspects, and I hope to have a fruitful deliberation on this issue. Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Ambassador.
Share screen. شايف انه first of all, I would like to sincerely thank the Italian Center for African Studies for organizing this interesting forum to present Ethiopia on the Grand Ethiopian Dam perspective. So I will go on focusing on the operation aspect presentation. So in first, the link between DOP and GERD operation, what the DOP says, I will make that. Second, the historical and future hydrology, how they look like. This is an important input in operation study. And the operation boundary conditions, Ethiopian proposal on operation aspect, Egypt and Sudan proposal, and the way forward as we see it. So the principle we agreed from DOP, Article 4, it says, the three countries shall utilize their shared water resource. Keep in mind this shared water resources in their respective territories in an equitable and reasonable manner, not in a unilateral manner, but in a reasonable and equitable manner. So sharing implied in that agreement. The second, the three countries shall take all appropriate measures to prevent the causing of significant harm in the utilization of the Blue Nile, main Nile. So this implies not on Ethiopia to take care of the downstream, but the downstream to take care also of the upstream.
to acknowledge our development. For example, only even in hydropower generation. The next important provision about GERD operation is Article 5. We said we respect the final outcome of the Tripartite National Committee, TNC. This is a 3 countries established committee. So if the consultant had been produced report, the 3 countries should have agreed on how to fill the dam. If they didn't agree, there is no commitment on Ethiopia to abide by that, except the international law, which equitable and reasonable, no significant harm. As Lemlem explained, the TNC study simply failed because Sudan and Egypt requested Ethiopia any impact on when specifically when dam is filling should be measured on the existing water use in Egypt and Sudan. So it happened that Sudan and Egypt basically completely utilized the water. So, for example, when we fill 5 BCM, it means we are reducing 5 BCM from their use. So the impact is very clear. But what we are filling our dam is from our share. That's an important aspect. Ethiopia has a share of water from 77 BCM it generates in its own territory. So the operation aspect agreement is in the spirit of cooperation. It's not mandatory. Although I'm not a lawyer, as a technical person, when I read, at that time we should have written it, we shall agree on this. We didn't do that because we know our right is embedded there. We are starting to construct major dams in Blue Nile. And then finally, what we're going to agree is annual operation of the GERD, annual operation of the GERD, and there is a condition on it, which the owner of the dam may adjust from time to time, because the operation agreement should not solely be unanimously, decided by 3 countries. Our share is not determined. We want to keep our right on this aspect so that we put in the declaration of principle agreement, which the 3 leaders signed, our adjustment right. Now, when we look on operation aspect after the GERD being filled, let's say after 4 or 5 years, filling could be completed. If good hydrology is there, the important aspect will be what happened in the Blue Nile watershed. So Blue Nile watershed, it has 172,250 kilometers square, which is basically half of Italy. It's a very large watershed. More than 50 million people live now. And this resource is also for 100 million people of Ethiopia. So what happened in this watershed, what we develop in this watershed will affect the historical flow which we used to have, let's say 49 BCM, which fluctuates from drought year 1913, high wet year, and so on, 1984 drought periods. In the future, when we irrigate upstream, when you use the water for drinking purpose, industrial purpose, and for hydropower generation, minor evaporation, the mean will drop. So the future agreement, operation agreement, should necessarily implies we should know about our future. In particular for Ethiopia, this is a critical element. So the future flow will change. This historical flow cannot be assumed to repeat in the next 50 or 100 years. So the parameters, as I mentioned, which necessarily required to arrive at operation is the inflow into GERD from Abai Basin and In that year, the amount of reservoir water we have in the dam, we going to operate from 625 meter above sea level to 640 under normal condition. So the reservoir water level oscillates between these two at the end of the wet period, end of September, it will reach 640 full supply level. When there is drought, there is a drought cushion management, about 20 BCM reserved, and the maximum, the water level drop for safe minimum operation is 610. Now we're looking this after 15 years. If the future development around here indirectly means if the three countries does not agree on the water allocation, water share about Blue Nile or Nile, we could not decide on the future release. So the future release is dependent on the hydrology and the upstream development as I explained before, and the energy demand, which we fluctuate, but in the near 10-15 years, even it may not reach to that level. Once the filling is completed, I suspect, I imagine that the whole energy will be absorbed in Ethiopia. By that time, another dams could have been ready. So for us, we know we have made repeated studies starting from USCBR 1964, then French study on Abai Basin. We have a minimum of 1 million hectare for irrigation, well studied, already ready there. And we have a potential of 50,000 terawatt hour per year hydropower generation. This means 1/3 of GERD capacity. The GERD is now 15,000 gigawatt hour per year. The potential is 55 terawatt hour per year. So what we now at GERD side, we are generating from main Abai 1/3 of the potential in Abai. So there are this development to come, including domestic and industrial water demands. In our discussion in long-term operation with our brothers, Egypt and Sudan, they want the drought threshold level in the reservoir to drop below 610. This could not happen because laboratory tests, turbine tests in the lab have proved the safe operation zone. You know, it is 400 megawatt each individual turbines. So blade damage should be prevented. So 20 BCM is also quite sufficient to manage drought in the grid sequence. Another important aspect for us, because this is a hydropower dam, waiting at higher level for the rainy seasons will give more energy generation. This with various simulation we already proved. So the 610 meter level is already technically is fixed. This is a minimum safe operating level. Now, Ethiopian proposal, in the spirit of cooperation, how to go about operation aspect, while there is no water allocation agreement. What we said, every year, we know how much, at the end of September, we know how much water is entered into GERD. Of course, during rainy period, we also generate for 3 months, electricity generated water also pass downstream. We are together and we know the state of the hydrology, whether it is dry, wet, or average year. And then if it is drought, the decision we already agreed more or less on how to manage drought. That table will be invoked. If it is non-drought year, wet year, it is a flood management issue that is more relevant to Sudan. But on average year, basically, what we propose to them, the inflow will be released downstream, minus evaporation and minus minor use from the around the reservoir. So this statement is a very critical statement. I know there are many experts in Egypt, and some politicians also talk about Ethiopia is constructing the dam to control the downstream. No, it is not. In this agreement, we said that we release downstream the inflow. What is inflow in our reservoirs? Minus evaporation, minus minor use there for water supply, urbanization, and so on. So this is secured. The dam is not to hold water to deprive downstream. So this fact should be very clear. It's not in the agreement, it is there. It's not the intention of Ethiopia from the very beginning. So during drought, because of GERD, Sudan and Egypt are in a better position. In fact, this is a support of Ethiopia to Sudan and Egypt. Up to now in this agreement, payment for this is not introduced. It is a very good support from Ethiopia side. Of course, if they ask more than what we do, transaction aspect may come. So if you go in details of the operation in general, more than 60% of the time, even more than that, 65% of the time, it's a normal operation condition prevails. The water level oscillates from 625, 640. Things goes for normal for downstream countries. We commit for that. During drought, we agreed on a matrix to add more water downstream from reservoir because we need it, they also need it. This is a benefit, this is cooperation. Because sometimes we may not need it to release, but this is a commitment from Ethiopian side for cooperation purpose, because sometimes it may be better to, postpone energy generation for some reason, sell it later. But that we forgo that for sake of cooperation. And on this aspect, there is a very technical, critical matter. In long-term operation, year by year, when we evaluate this, there is one concept to say when drought arrives in the Blue Nile. So with drought, we agreed on a threshold value, Q92. In this case, 37 BCM, the average is 49. If the annual inflow is less than 37 BCM, then drought is said to occur. But this in the future will change. If I withdraw 10 BCM upstream for irrigation purpose, the 37 will move to basically to 27 BCM as drought because of upstream uses. So on this aspect, this is a major hurdle. The major hurdle, listeners, you need to understand, it is not about GERD. It is about future use of Nile water. The major hurdle is now from technical aspect on this quantile. So Egypt side, basically on this quantile, you change the quantile 37 value drought only if we agree. That means they don't agree, for sure, we know. From the trend up to now, we see, it means then we cannot have future project upstream of GERD. This is impossible for Ethiopia to accept. And also, another important factor, the significant harm. This should not be attached to this quantile. 37 BCM does not mean to say if there is below 37, there is significant harm on downstream countries. Harm is not measured in this way. It's only after we make our allocation, our share, then harm, we can talk about harm if we deviate from our share. So Egypt basically is proposing there are different way of putting their demands. A drought, 3 layers of drought management, 37, the first layer, and then they measure drought from the release from the GERD, unusually, to make sure that the last layer of drought management, like 40 BCM, when you add evaporation on it, when you add losses, it's near to 46 BCM, near to the average. So they want the dam to the significant harm level to be raised to near average condition. That means keeping the share. Another way of putting it, they are saying place the average rule curve into the agreement. It means the consultant for this, we developed the average rule curve for GERD operation using historical flow data. Usually this is done. The next exercise, if 10 BCM reduce, what will be the rule curve has not been done, but they took this to continue forever, which is not possible. This means 49 BCM. Continue generating electricity forever. That's not possible. Of course, we know when we make upstream development in upstream of GERD, energy generation from GERD reduce for us also. We know that. But water supply, industrial demand, irrigation could be very urgent for us in that moment due to various cases. So in conclusion, what they are, if this is fulfilled, then the agreement has to be binding and permanent. Of course, this secures their share, as they call it, which ignore Ethiopian share. Totally unfair. So the purpose is, because of GERD, control future development upstream of GERD by putting conditions that the 3 countries shall agree to make any change on quantiles and their values. That is veto power for Egypt and Sudan, actually, on Ethiopian development. Another, although it is not a very important aspect, during, let's say, after operation, after 20 years, refilling may be required. So for refilling, they put different condition. You need to refill slowly. Of course, we understand their argument because after drought, we are refilling after drought. Our reservoir is also low. So in that case, we need to fill very slowly. But the fact is that filled water upstream is by far beneficial than filled water downstream. Even the logic, because if that happens, if the next drought comes faster, Sudan is totally unprotected. So technically is not also viable. The Sudan position in many aspects resembles Ethiopian positions. Drought management, we are very close. Average rule curve, they don't demand on this. They say they give us every year the new updated rule curve for information. We are very close, refilling very close. But on the water aspect, on the fundamental issue about future development, they are exactly the same, but they use different language. So what they say, regarding future development upstream of GERD, Sudan put condition by stating that this agreement shall not prejudice the right of any of the parties in existing development downstream of GERD. So for us, okay, for us, it looks they allow our future development. That's okay. But the problem, as I explained before, the existing development, because they fully utilize the Nile water, we cannot subscribe for that. That's why the French company study failed. If we acknowledge that, we are lost the game. So this is the problem with Sudan proposition. So this is an indirect approach to protect, in general, the 1959 agreements, their share of water On the ground, both Sudan and Egypt existing use. This is fact. And all these are unilateral, by the way. As Ambassador Fassa explained, they never consulted us. They did it unilaterally. Even we asked them unreasonably, unequitably, because they forgot our interest. The country which generates the water. It is not envying their work. It is not that we don't mean that Egypt and Sudan do not develop irrigation, water supply, but they should not forget Ethiopia on this aspect. The sole provider of the water, Ethiopia, should have its own share. This is a very important aspect. So maybe by way of note here, the CFA, the Nile Basin drafted agreement, failed on the same reason. It says Egypt and Sudan reject one statement, very important, not to significantly affect the water security of any other Nile Basin state. The other countries propose this, but they demand other riparian, including Ethiopia, to accept not to adversely affect the water security and current use and rights of any other Nile Basin state. So current use is a fundamental issue. So water sharing agreement can solve this, or year by year, slowly, agreement slowly can solve this one. So as we see it, in summary, the unknown is the future climate and hydrology. Ethiopia needs the water for water supply, irrigation, hydropower, and others. So long-term operation, as Egypt and Sudan put it, undoable for Ethiopia to arrive at binding permanent future release, because Ethiopia must develop. We cannot forgo this element without veto power by Egypt and Sudan, in absence of water sharing agreement. If there is agreement, if you know our share, if they know their share, then completely permanent binding agreement Ethiopia will accept. There is no problem. Now the solution for this is already ready on the table. Agree on the first filling, negotiate Blue Nile water allocation in the coming 10 years, then binding GERD by future release as Sudan border will follow. I hope the three leaders, as they did in DOP, will see this a clear solution and will conclude the GERD agreement. So GERD, by the way, is a blessing for all. The future of the Nile, as I see it, is bright. It's bring many benefits. It's new to Sudan and Egypt, mainly for Ethiopia, energy, for Sudan, flood control. Egypt, sometimes when you discuss with their experts, they say, no, God cannot control flood in Egypt. It is. If there is consecutive wet years, the trouble will come for Hayasawan Dam. At that time, God will be the savior. Especially in climate change, we know in Blue Nile, wet condition is prevailing. It's inclined for that. So there is a saving of 5 BCM, a very clear saving of water from reduction of overflooding, hard water level, low level operation by 3 to 4 meters, because the water is stored in Ethiopia. So this is a new benefit to the downstream countries. At drought period, we have 20 BCM to use for the three countries. This is also a blessing. So we need then to work out if Sudan and Egypt acknowledge our future development, which enters stage by stage, by the way, slowly, shall not be apprehension to Sudan and Egypt, as we are doing it based on international safety principles of equitable and reasonable utilization and causing no significant harm on reasonable downstream use. And they will bring more benefit to Ethiopia, Sudan, and Egypt and the region, even the future dams. So the future is then cooperation. It's not, the path is not conflict, because there is no conflict on water, you know. That is my final point. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the presentation. Now we have a question and answer, and of course, Ambassador Lemlen Fiseja asked us to be the first one to answer to some of the question. Could you read the question on the chat, or okay, then we leave the floor to you, and I organize some other question. The only interesting thing that we could say is that this more than question and remarks, there has been a quite interesting debate into the scientific community in the chat. So it's very interesting, and we will send you all the question at the end. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you for the questions. I think the two questions that were raised in relation to the legal topics I have presented are the first one, how can the concepts of international law, the principles of international law be applicable in this negotiation when one country is trying to preserve its hegemony over the Nile River? That's very accurate present portrayal of the facts, in fact. And as I have presented in my slides, the major challenge we are facing is that there is no room for negotiation that's being left by Egypt, whereas there are a number of rooms for negotiation we are trying to pave for the countries to come into an agreement. But the international law principles, the rule-based order over the Nile Basin in Ethiopia's policy position is a viable method, the viable approach for the three countries, for the entire Nile Basin countries, in fact. Otherwise, reversing the monopoly of the water over the Nile and trying to establish equitable and reasonable utilization is going to be very challenging. We cannot play a power politics over the Nile Basin. We can only play a rule-based, negotiation, as well as exchange of ideas and positions in order to come up with, a viable kind of cooperation over the resource. We have a larger agenda. We all, Ethiopia, Egypt, and Sudan are all countries in Africa, member states of the African Union. They have, more important economic, political, and other aspirations they should be able to achieve. The water issue is one issue which should really get a resolution by the agreement of the countries. It should not be something we should fight over. It should not be something we should aggravate our relations over. Ethiopia regrets what we have suffered so far in terms of having a very hostile relation with our neighbors because of this water. And we believe there is no need really to resort to such course of action. Rather, the law is there, the principles are there, and we can really reach an agreement without taking or wasting so much of our praise. That is the first one. The second one is, are you, Lemlem, contradicting yourself by criticizing Egypt for its water utilization? Because it's downstream and the utilization in Egypt doesn't affect Ethiopia. The question is raised by a person by the name Maggie, I believe. That is one of the central misunderstandings on transboundary water resources. Utilization downstream affects the upper riparian countries. Egypt is defending its water use and water abuse to prohibit Ethiopia from utilizing its reasonable and equitable share. The water utilization scheme in Egypt concerns us because it's beyond what is equitable and what is reasonable for Egypt. The utilization scheme in Egypt and Sudan is already has already caused a significant harm over Ethiopia, because Egypt and Sudan are asking us, you have to respect our existing water use. Their existing water use is the excessive water use, the water wastage, and all other manifestations of water utilization in the two countries. That's why we are concerned about the water use in Egypt and Sudan, not because it creates an obligation on us, but because the two countries will invoke their water use to ask us to limit our utilization to the extent that respects their entitlement, their so-called or perceived entitlement. But as I have concluded in my slides, this concern is not out of an obligation that emanates from law or practice. No, it's not. This concern emanates from the trend in our negotiations and talks, whereby Egypt and Sudan raise their existing use as a restriction over our right. And we have filed disclaimers time and time again before. We have said the water utilization you are establishing by the High Aswan Dam, by the Toshka Canal, are unilateral and cannot be cited to prevent Ethiopia from utilizing the resource in an equitable and reasonable manner. It was a warning we have been giving Egypt since 1956, and now that warning is materializing. So the water utilization scheme in Egypt and Sudan is a source of concern for us. And it can cause a significant harm over the upper riparian countries. I hope this understanding is really catched by the person who posed the question, but I really appreciate you raising that very important issue in this platform. Thank you, Ambassador.
Hello?
Yes, Ambassador.
I don't know if you can hear me. There are some questions for your colleague, or you prefer to be addressed to some other question regarding you. I think it's there's some question for your colleague that can be posed. I don't know.
Are you around?
I don't know if he's connected.
Yes, he's around.
Yeah, I am around. Yeah.
ዶክተር ለአንተ የተነሱ ጥያቄዎች ካሉ
Yeah. It's for Lemlem. Maybe if I answer one question, why we withdraw from US-led mediation. There are two reasons. The first, they asked us, they drafted the agreement for the three countries. So in this agreement, we know upstream development issue is there. So when the three countries did not agree about upstream development, the third party cannot draft on that. It's a very complicated issue. That's one of the major reasons.
Yeah, maybe in addition to that, you are now, the US instrument, which is by our Egyptian brothers time and time again. We withdrew from the US process because it was an unjust process. That's, I have said a negotiated agreement is the only option. The UN process was not a negotiation process. The UN process, the document Egypt claims to have signed, is a document that guarantees Egypt's historic right, that prohibits Ethiopia from three things. The first one, it abolishes our right to use the Nile water in the future, completely prohibits us from developing the resource upstream of the GERD. Second, it fully prohibits us from optimally operating the GERD. It has a number of drought thresholds, which we are expected to manage single-handedly by releasing every water whenever there is drought, as if we don't have any demand in our territories. And third, it subjects the filling and operation of the GERD to the consent of Egypt and Sudan. The 1959 agreement is not only a water allocation agreement, it's a political pact between Egypt and Sudan. Egypt and Sudan have a pact to maintain a common position on negotiations with regard to the Nile. Egypt and Sudan, if they have it their way, will never allow Ethiopia to utilize the resource. And the US process, and as well as the outcome, which we don't recognize at all, comes up with a solution which Egypt has subscribed to the process. That's why Ethiopia withdrew from that process and will not really be part of another. I don't even think it's in the best interest of Egypt to impose that kind of agreement over Ethiopia, even if we accept. Why would we leave the heritage of war and confrontation to the upcoming generation? Why can't we leave peace? Why can't we leave cooperation for the next generation? How can Egyptians live a peaceful life while Ethiopians are prohibited from utilizing the Blue Nile, their main water resource, their lifeline? In the long run, it's a non-visionary. I hope it's something which the Egyptians will change a course from, because it's not really in the best interest of Egypt as well to preserve this kind of hydro hegemony over the Nile. Thank you. Maybe መቼ ነው የምትሞሉት የሚለው ጥያቄ ዶክተር ይልማ?
Thank you very much. There is a question from Sara Di Simone. If you want me to read it, I copied it on the chat, but I can read it to both of you. It's a general question that may conclude this question and answer section. Large dam construction remains one of the pillars of the Ethiopian development strategy to ensure sustainable energy production for local development and export. But at the same time, the region is also being very much affected by the effect of climate change. I was wondering if there are any study assessing the possible impact of climate change on the existing watershed that are being currently developed, who produce them, and if there are any coping strategy to deal with those. Thank you.
Thank you, Federico. First, I will try to answer on the second filling. It will happen in July 2021. So every preparation is done to that end. The three countries have completely agreed on all conditions on the first filling. So if there is drought occurs, Ethiopia may suspend the filling because of this condition, although we know we have full rights to in utilizing this, but with brotherly, I'm sharing the drought also as possible. We pass the water after generating electricity downstream, but the water level will not rise. So we agreed on the second year filling completely, 13.5 PCM. On the second question, you are right. This is now a major issue, how to preserve the watershed. The Ethiopian government is doing on its side revegetation, afforestation scheme every year, and millions of trees are being planted. Soil and water conservation schemes have been also placed with mass mobilization. People are encouraged because also they see the direct benefit from GERD. Their work is useful for that. Regarding the climate changes impact studies, most of the studies indicate there will be increase in rainfall over Abai Basin. But this is forecast in high and low. Some also say there may be decline. There is also one issue. The source area of moisture for rainfall on Abai Basin is from Congo Basin. So the Congo forest has very much bearing on moisture feeding on the intertropical convergence zone system. And what happened also in tropical Pacific Ocean, which triggers El Nino, the severe drought issue, is also to some extent known, but we are not sure how this will happen in under climate change condition. But there is a positive tone in a sense. There will be more rain in Abai Basin, and we want Egypt and Sudan to participate in this watershed management work, because it generates water for us, for themselves too. So they should have helped us in managing also the watershed. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. We have another question from Mancuso. And having heard the two positions, so it's also referring to the presentation that was held by the Egyptian embassy at the beginning of March. It looks like there are insurmountable issues between the different positions. Without bringing the issue to an international court, would it be practicable to resort to a third-party arbitration mediation to facilitate a solution?
Yeah, maybe
We answer it in two perspectives, from technical and legal, legal aspect.
Thank you for the question. It's a very important question. The best method to resolve the differences on the Nile is negotiation, because we can have it's a leap we are requesting for, a leap from a hydro hegemony to equitable utilization. More than anyone, Egypt and Sudan would need the understanding and good faith of the upper the source countries of the Nile. That understanding can only be acquired if we sit down in good faith and negotiate. If we go to, let's say, a court of law or an arbitration or a certain kind of process that will impose a solution from the outside, affirming the status quo or reversing the status quo, it will not facilitate the best kind of interface between the three countries. If the political commitment is there for all of us to resolve this dispute, negotiating it and trying to come up with a solution that best addresses our needs as three neighborly countries that are stuck together forever, linked by a very, very important and the longest river in the world, is the only option. Because reversal of the status quo by a third party or affirmation of the status quo by a third party will only aggravate our problems, add additional fuel to the existing problem. Instead, negotiating it and getting time and working on mobilizing resources together, preserving the environment to add to the cake, to enlarge the cake, instead of having an unnecessary back and forth over a very small piece of cake, is going to be the viable option for the three countries. And we believe negotiation, technical understanding is the best solution for the countries, not a solution that comes from a third party, which may risk alienation of either of the countries. Thank you.
If you allow me, the fundamental issue now is about future development upstream of GERD. In other words, the water sharing aspect of Ethiopia. For them, of course, they say we have a water share. For Ethiopia, it's zero. So the three countries effectively has not started discussion on water sharing. How could then a third party comes on an issue which has not been started at all? Because GERD filling, nearly we agreed. Annual level operation, we forwarded to them. So that's the remaining is about water sharing. We have not started discussing about it because, as one person asked before, what Egypt does not like about African Union approach is that they explicitly put upstream development issue to be entangled with operation. So they want, together with Sudan, then to get out of this route to another mediation process. We need to face the challenge, discuss about it. I believe that there is sufficient water for the three countries to work on and to benefit much and much more. As Lamlam said, we can enlarge the cake and so on. Thank you.
And thank you very much to you, Yilma Selehi, and to Ambassador Lemlem Fiseha, and of course also to the Ambassador Fiseha Sawel, Director of MFA Ethiopia, for taking part of this presentation. I think we had a lot of success both in people listening and especially in people interacting with this conference, which we are very happy about it. I think I will leave the floor to our president for the last goodbye, and then all of us we will listen to a song from a Ethiopian Italian singer called Saba Anglana that has been taking a concert on water, especially during 2018 when we had our conference at the Egyptian Museum in Torino. So Ethiopian singer in the Egyptian Museum in Torino. This is our message for all of you. I leave the floor to Ambassador Renzo Rosso, the president of the Center of African Study. Thank you very much to all of you.
Thank you very much again. I think that this hour and a half meeting, webinar with a very lively discussion has been a very valuable contribution in order to clarify to all of us and to the audience, which has been rather numerous, the aspects not always so easy to catch, to understand from the point of view of common persons who are not accustomed to this kind of very technical but also very political debates. I thank you in particular all the speakers, starting from Ambassador Fiseha Sawel, with Minister Councillor Lemden Fiseha, and with Dr. Yilma Selehi, who have given from their specific points of view, political and technical, and all valuable contributions to this debate. And I thank also the audience who has participated, has started a debate of its own. Of course, it's a very controversial issue, so we are to be expected that the same debate we have among the different countries concerned also exists between the common audiences from the three countries. But I hope also that we can. I am also attaching to the final words of the speaker concerning the need and the usefulness of negotiation that remains the main avenue for an agreement between all the parties. I thank you very much again, and I hope that we can in different occasions we can go even deeper into this debate, and hopefully with positive outcomes. Let's hope for that. Thank you again, and see you to the next occasion of debate.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Ambassador. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.